Good evening, everyone. You're watching Spaceflight Now's special live coverage of an update coming from NASA leadership regarding the latest on the International Space Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Thank you so much for joining us on this Thursday evening for this breaking news live coverage here on the channel. If you haven't already, and as you're settling in, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could hit that like button for us and share the stream, as this will likely be an important briefing, and we want to make sure as many people as possible are informed in real time. We're just before the top of the hour. NASA is slated to host this briefing at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. Just as a brief scene setter for where we are right now, yesterday, Wednesday, January 7th, was when NASA and the crew on the International Space Station were preparing for a spacewalk that was planned for early this morning outside of the International Space Station. They were going to set up some of the precursor equipment for a rollout solar array, but then Wednesday afternoon, NASA put out word that there was a medical issue with one of the crew members, and so the spacewalk was being postponed. Then around midnight, we got another update from NASA, who informed the public that there may be an early end to the Crew-11 mission. This was new information and is still being assessed by NASA, at least at that point, and we should be getting a lot more information, we hope, in the briefing set to start in the next couple of minutes. And as we have a couple of minutes to talk about where we are with the space station, with Crew-11, we're joined by a wonderful friend of the channel, Gina Sunseri, who's a Houston-based reporter with CBS News, currently at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas right now. Gina, you're outside the building where crew train there, go through a lot of ISS preparations. For those familiar who've taken the tour, it's Building 9. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's not only Building 9, but I know today astronauts have been going in and out, doing what they can, because there's some training. Bringing a crew home early, if that's what NASA chooses to do, is still going to require training. You understand how complicated a SpaceX Dragon is. They can't just undock and splash down. Weather related, all of that. And so this is all very important, but really kind of leads to, we know that NASA won't reveal the name of the astronaut who is suffering the medical episode, whatever it is. But bringing a crew home, this is unprecedented. This has never happened before. So this is just a very unique situation that we find ourselves in here.
Yeah, really history in the making. There's just been one other mission in all of spaceflight where there's been a health-related issue that caused the mission to end early, and that was a Russian-led mission. Now, we're expecting to hear from NASA leadership that include the Administrator, Jared Isaacman, the Associate Administrator, Amit Kshatriya, and the Chief Health and Medical Officer, Dr. James Polk. So that gives folks at home sort of an idea of the level of importance for this briefing, as well as some of the details we might get from it. Typically, with something that involves commercial crew, we would hear from Steve Stitch, the program manager, or the program manager for the International Space Station, Dana Weigel. But Gina, the fact that this briefing that has come together fairly quickly from the outside, that it's being led by the NASA administrator, what does that tell you about the gravity of where we are right now?
That tells me that they're making a decision they've never had to make before. Will, we all went through the Butch Sonny Starliner saga, which went on for months and months and months, and there was so much misinformation about that. But, you know, NASA had many options to make. But they took their time to make those decisions. They met repeatedly. They went over their options. This is something, as of Tuesday, we were all covering the spacewalk briefing, how this next spacewalk and then the second one would come out. It's not just the IROSAs, you know, the alpha magnetic spectrometer, the microbe swabbing as they go back, and lots of other important things that are not getting done right now and probably won't for a while. The other thing that I wanted to bring up, NASA trains for these things. And the other NASA astronaut up there, Chris Williams, he's a Harvard trained physician. So it's not like they're floundering around up there. They've got so much experience, and they've got flight surgeons on the ground. They have expertise at their fingertips. So it's going to be very interesting to see what decision they make.
Yeah, and of course, if the decision is made that they decide to end Crew-11 early, as they alluded might be the case in their midnight briefing, that would leave just Chris Williams as the lone American astronaut on board the International Space Station. It's happened a few times in
Mm-hmm.
the history of the ISS, most notably, of course, after the Columbia disaster. There were
Mm-hmm.
those pockets where there was just an American and a Russian cosmonaut that were the caretakers of the space station before it was in mid 2020 or 2006 when they expanded back out to a three-person crew. But it's been a while, almost 20 years since there's just been a lone American on the ISS. So this is quite extraordinary if, in fact, the decision has been made by NASA to bring Crew-11 home early and leave Chris Williams there with his two cosmonaut colleagues.
And Chris is a newbie. Ironically, Crew-11 includes one of those astronauts, Mike Fink, who did one of the shortest spacewalks in the history of NASA when he was up there. I think it was Mike, and Stephen could probably remember who the other astronaut was. But NASA has dealt with being short staffed on the space station. What it means is they won't get as much research done. And Stephen, you'll remember from the spacewalk briefing on Tuesday that NASA's in this funky place where they're maintaining the space station, but they're also getting ready to phase it out. And so if they can't do all the research they want, this is going to be a problem for them.
Yeah, it's certainly something that has to factor into the calculus and all of the various worst case scenarios of if we take Crew-11 away now and leave a month gap, what if during that month gap there's an issue on the Russian segment that causes them to have to leave? Then what is, there's a lot of what ifs that NASA has to consider in making a decision this impactful. Just to set the timeline for folks, the way before all this happened, things were supposed to flow is next month, no earlier than February 15th, the Crew-12 mission, which is led by Jessica Meir, was set to launch the International Space Station on a Dragon spacecraft from Florida. Then they would dock with the ISS about a day or so,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a little bit less after that. Then typically there's a brief direct handover period where the incoming crew gets to learn from the outgoing crew all the ins and outs of the space station, things that may have changed about the configuration of various modules, and make sure they're in a good spot before they have to take over all the science and maintenance of the ISS. Ideally, that is the way it always should go and the way it always will go. But, fate intervenes sometimes, and you have a situation potentially like back in 2021 when Crew-2 was coming
Mm-hmm.
down, Crew-3 was going up, and there was just a perfect storm, pardon the pun, between bad weather
Mm-hmm.
and a minor crew health issue that prevented the launch from going up on Halloween that year and didn't actually
Mm-hmm.
fly until November 10th. So, Gina, they've been here before. Like you said, they go through exhaustive training, both on the flight operator side as well as the crew themselves. Before you hop back in, just want to note for everyone, we're just a few minutes past the top of the hour. The briefing is scheduled to start at 5 p.m. Eastern, so we're standing by, and of course, we will bring you the briefing in its entirety when it does begin, but just letting you know that it hasn't started quite yet, but we're keeping a very close eye on that for when it does start. So, Gina, with all that out of the way, your thoughts on, the fact that
Well,
they've been somewhat here before.
yeah, they've been here before. And missions in the past during the space shuttle days, German astronaut Hans Schlegel got space sickness. He was supposed to dock and do a spacewalk the next day, and he could not. And remember, recently, just this past year or last year, 2025, we had a crew splash down, and we still don't know which crew member
Oh,
suffered
Gina, let me interrupt
health
you.
issues.
The briefing
We're,
is starting now.
the,
Let's go ahead and listen in.
okay, excellent. Sounds good. You got it.
NASA's press secretary, and your moderator today. Our participants in today's briefing include Administrator Jared Isaacman, Associate Administrator Amit Kshatriya, and Chief Health and Medical Officer Dr. J.D. Polk. Each of the participants will provide opening remarks and updates prior to shifting to Q&A. With that, I'll give the floor to Administrator Isaacman.
All right. Thank you, Bethany, and thank you for everyone being here on short notice. So for over 60 years, NASA has set the standard for safety and security in crewed spaceflight. In these endeavors, including the 25 years of continuous human presence on board the International Space Station, the health and the well-being of our astronauts is always and will be our highest priority. Yesterday, January 7th, a single crew member on board the station experienced a medical situation and is now stable. After discussions with Chief Health and Medical Officer Dr. J.D. Polk and leadership across the agency, I've come to the decision that it's in the best interest of our astronauts to return Crew-11 ahead of their planned departure. Within the coming days, the Dragon Endeavour spacecraft will depart the International Space Station with Commander Zina Cardman, pilot Mike Fink, Kimya Yui from JAXA, and Oleg Platonov of Roscosmos, and safely return them to Earth. We expect to provide a further update within the next 48 hours as to the anticipated undock and reentry timeline. Over the last 5 months, Crew-11 contributed to the ongoing operations of the space station, conducted extensive scientific research, completed the majority of their mission objectives, and upheld the standards of professionalism for which astronauts are known. Crew-12 is currently scheduled to launch as soon as mid-February. Alongside our international and commercial partners, NASA is evaluating their timeline to include earlier launch opportunities. We will provide more information when it's available. In the meantime, NASA astronaut Chris Williams, having launched to the station on November 27th on Soyuz MS-28, maintains our American presence in space and will support the space station's operations and scientific efforts. NASA astronauts and our teams in mission control and our professionals who train for every possible scenario at every step of the mission, including moments just like this. I'm proud of the swift effort across the agency thus far to ensure the safety of our astronauts, and I know NASA and our commercial partners will successfully bring Crew-11 safely home. And with that, I'll turn it over to Associate Administrator Amit Kshatriya.
Good evening. Thank you, sir. I'll be brief. We'll get to Dr. Polk as soon as we can, but I'll just add a few comments. In every discussion over the last 24 hours as we've assessed the situation, crew safety has always remained our highest priority, and as it always is across the agency. We never take shortcuts. We never compromise when it comes to protecting our astronauts. The work accomplished during this period reflects the precision and professionalism of the flight control teams on the ground and the astronauts aboard ISS. Our crews are extensively trained, as the administrator mentioned, to manage unexpected medical situations and other off-nominal events, including onboard training, which we conduct regularly for these situations. Yesterday was a textbook example of that training in action. Once the situation on the station stabilized, careful deliberations led us to the decision to return Crew-11, as the administrator mentioned, while ensuring minimal operational impact to ongoing work aboard ISS. Operating ISS is a complicated task and has been for the past 25 years with crews on board. The safe operation of the station and the protection of the crew, who are the stewards of station operations, is the hallmark of flight operations and what we are reminded of every day of the unforgiving nature of human spaceflight. With that, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Polk.
Thanks, Amit. First, probably goes without saying, but I'll still reiterate as a physician that I'm not going to speak about any particular astronaut or any particular specific diagnoses. I'd ask that we still respect the privacy of the astronaut. As Administrator mentioned earlier, the astronaut is absolutely stable, so I have to reiterate that again. But anytime we have a medical incident, we embark on looking at diagnoses and what we would call a workup to get a differential diagnosis on what's happening with that patient or astronaut on board. And as many of you know, we have a very robust suite of medical hardware on board the International Space Station, but we don't have the complete amount of hardware that I would have in the emergency department, for example, to complete a workup of a patient. And in this particular incident, that the medical incident was sufficient enough that we were concerned about the astronaut, that we would like to complete that workup. And the best way to complete that workup is on the ground, where we have the full suite of medical testing hardware. Now, again, because the astronaut is absolutely stable, this is not an emergent evacuation. We're not immediately disembarking and getting the astronaut down. But it leaves that lingering risk and lingering question as to what that diagnosis is, and that means there's some lingering risk for that astronaut on board. And so always we err on the side of the astronaut's health and welfare, and in this particular case, we are doing the same. And I should reiterate, in our 25-year history of the International Space Station, we've had many models and Monte Carlo analysis models that have said we should have had a medical evacuation approximately every 3 years in that 25-year history, and we've not had one to date. And even in this case, we're erring on the side of caution. Again, it's not an emergent evacuation, but we are erring on the side of caution for the crew member and in their best interest and in their best medical welfare. And with that, I think we will take questions. Is that it, Bethany? Okay.
So with that, we will open the floor to questions. So if there's anybody here in the room who would like to ask any questions, we'll open it to y'all first. And if not, I will turn this over to the operator to go to the phone bridge. And we'll go with Kristen Fisher with Endless Void Media. There's a microphone right behind you. Yeah.
Thank you all so much for holding this briefing. My question is for really whoever wants to take it. I understand you guys can't speak to the specific nature of this astronaut's medical condition, but I'm curious if you all can shed some light on the hours before a spacewalk takes place and the strain that that can put on an astronaut's body. And can you say if that at all contributed to the medical condition that this astronaut suffered? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. This actually had nothing to do with the operational environment in preparing for a spacewalk at all. This was totally unrelated to any operations on board. And of course, we do a huge amount of testing for astronauts before they go to orbit. And they're used to those operational environments. They practice the spacewalk and the pre-breathe many, many, many times. But this was not related to the operations or the spacewalk at all.
Thank you.
And with that, we will go to the phone bridge online.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you'd like to ask a question, please press star one. Unmute your phone and record your name clearly. If you need to withdraw your question, press star two. Again, to ask a question, please press star one. Our first question is from Bill Harwood from CBS News. Go ahead, your line is open.
Thank you very much. Bill Harwood, CBS News. This is either for the administrator or Amit. Can you move up Crew-12, bring Crew-11 down, and still take care of Artemis 2 in February as currently planned, or would you need some separation between those missions, and might that mean a slip to March for Artemis 2? Thanks.
So the question was, if we pull up the timeline on Crew-12, will that have the potential to interfere with our Artemis 2 preparations? These would be totally separate campaigns at this point. We would, as we mentioned before, we're still evaluating what earlier dates would be achievable, if any, for Crew-12. So right now, we're going to look at all of our standard process to prepare for Crew-12 and look for opportunities if we can bring it in while simultaneously conducting our Artemis 2 campaign. There's no reason to believe at this point in time that there'd be any overlap that we'd have to deconflict for.
Next question is from Joey Roulette from Reuters. Go ahead, your line's open.
Hey, thanks. A question for anyone who can answer it. Can you say if this medical issue is related to an injury that was sustained on the space station? I know we said it wasn't related to any operational environment or operational issues, but was it an injury versus some other type of medical issue? And then also, is there anything you have to do regulatorily with Crew Dragon in order to get it to come home early? Like, you have to work with the FAA for some kind of emergency situation? Thanks.
So perhaps I can just hit the second part of that question, and then Doctor, if you want to address the first part. I mean, first of all, this is not an emergency deorbit. We retain the capability to bring astronauts home in a matter of hours if necessary. So this is recognizing, first of all, we're always going to do the right thing for our astronauts, but it's recognizing it's the end of the Crew-11 mission right now. They've achieved almost all of their mission objectives. Crew-12 is going to launch in a matter of weeks anyway. This is an opportune time when the vehicle is ready, when weather supports, to bring our crew home. So that's how it's looking. That's why we're going to get back to you in the next couple days as to what that timeline looks like. but it is not an emergency deorbit, even though we always retain that capability, and NASA and our partners train for that potential routinely. And then if you want to address the first part of the question.
Yeah, again, once again, this is not an operational issue. This is not an injury that occurred in the pursuit of operations, if that was the question. But unrelated to the operational environment that we have right now. It's mostly having a medical issue in the difficult areas of microgravity, and with the suite of hardware that we have at our avail to complete a diagnosis.
And now we'll move to Stephanie Chen of NHQ.
Yeah, hello, thank you. So 2 general questions. Would you consider any part of this operation, like especially like unusual, or are there any like special actions that you are able to maybe elaborate on a little bit more? And in a related sense, there's going to be like the Crew Dragon will be absent for a while, and could you maybe also elaborate on like how the remaining crew members will be dealing with this, and how how the return will look like?
I'm so sorry. The first part of your question, is it unusual? I'm sorry.
Yeah, like is this like especially uncommon, or like?
Well, as Dr. Polk mentioned, it's the first time we've done a controlled medical evacuation from the vehicle, so that is unusual. However, the procedures we're using to prepare for that are nominal procedures, because again, what's important to us is the whole crew, and we don't want to do anything, given the nature of the condition, that we put any other additional risk on the crew by diverging from our normal processes. So that's why we're doing essentially a controlled and expedited return. So no, from that standpoint, but from the standpoint that we have to do it in general, yes, it is unusual. But your second part?
Oh, the Crew Dragon will be temporarily absent, obviously.
That's right.
And how will the remaining crew members be kind of dealing with this situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, this is one of the reasons why we fly mixed crews on Soyuz and U.S. vehicles, because we want to make sure we have operators for both segments, Russian and U.S. segments, and perform all the nominal maintenance and other capabilities on the vehicle. There are a handful of exceptions in this particular case. In the history of ISS, we've had different crew complements. We flew with 3 crew for many years during assembly, and also during certain anomalous events. So that in and of itself is not unusual. There is, slightly elevated risk from the standpoint of we will not be conducting nominal or contingency U.S. EVAs, because right now we have a single U.S. crew member on board, and that carries with it, slightly elevated risk of our ability to respond in some cases. But that traded against, with Crew 12 being prepared for launch and our ability to potentially exercise acceleration options, as well as the other contingency procedures we can execute, and we believe that risk trades favorably in order to make sure we get into this safe configuration.
Thank you.
Yep.
And now I'll hand it back over to the operator to tend to those who are joining us virtually via the phone bridge.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lauren Grouch from Bloomberg. Go ahead, your line is open.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. This is for anyone who wants to answer. I'm just curious, will any extra precautions need to be taken to make sure the specific crew member affected will be comfortable and safe during their return to Earth? And are any special precautions being made on board right now in light of this medical issue to make sure that they are safe and healthy? Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. That's a great question. We actually plan for and work towards contingencies with every landing. So there's always emergency equipment. There are always preparations made to make sure all the crew members are in good shape and comfortable. There is no deviation from that or special plan, if you will, that we have to do with this crew member. Again, they are absolutely stable. But we prepare for anomalies or medical issues on every landing. Spaceflight is a dynamic environment, and certainly splashing down in the ocean is, as Administrator Isaacman knows firsthand. So we always prepare for those environments. We always have a suite of medical equipment and flight surgeons on board the ship, and contingency hospitals ready to go on every landing. So this is no different in that respect.
Our next question is from Gina Sunseri from Fox News. Go ahead, your line's open.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. This is a forward-looking question for Jared Isaacman. As NASA looks ahead to establishing a permanent presence on the moon and long-duration missions to Mars, what in-space medical capabilities would you like to have in place to support crew members?
Well, I appreciate the question. I mean, this is what we've been honing our skills on for the last 25 years. So every spacecraft, whether it's Dragon or Starliner or Orion, is equipped with medical kits to treat what we think are the most common medical developments that will happen as a result of being in the microgravity environment. The International Space Station is far more equipped. It has extensive capabilities, which is why we've done such a fantastic job over the last 25 years of caring for our crew members as they've maintained a continuous presence on orbit. So we are doing all of this to continue to learn. We will absolutely learn from this situation as well to see if that informs our future on-orbit operations, whether that be in the space station or our future lunar base that we are pursuing right now, and eventually for deep space missions to Mars. This is why the International Space Station is such a fantastic on-orbiting laboratory for this, for this type of a learning environment.
Our next question is from Denise Chow from NBC News. Go ahead, your line's open.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. Just for whoever is able to answer it, I was just wondering if someone could provide any kind of insight into how the entire crew is feeling. I understand astronauts are trained for all sorts of contingencies, but given that this is quite rare and unusual, I'm just wondering how the disposition of the crew members. Thank you.
I think we can all probably weigh in because we've all been having communication with the flight controllers, and I've spoken to crew members as well quite recently. This is exactly what our astronauts train and prepare for. So as I mentioned in my opening remarks, everybody did exactly as they had prepared for in a situation like this. They're all trained professionals. We're keeping them very well informed, but I would say that in light of the situation, everyone is performing as we would have expected.
We can continue online with the phone bridge.
Our next question is from Eileen Klautz from Aviation Week in Space Technology. Go ahead, your line is open.
Thanks very much. It's Irene Klautz. Are you planning any changes in the splashdown convoy and any changes also in just the deorbit and splash procedures? Would you be activating any additional sites to avoid weather delays or anything else you might be thinking of at this point? Thanks.
Irene, my understanding of the situation right now, we are planning for what would, other than the fact that we have pulled forward the timeline, a completely nominal deorbit. So we would still be targeting the same approved splashdown locations. We already prearranged various medical facilities as a standard, as part of our standard operating procedure, as the doctor explained previously. So we always retain the capability for an emergency deorbit. And I think that does speak to the situation and our confidence of how we're managing the situation. Is this is not an emergency deorbit where we would consider other than our pre-planned site. So right now we're looking for the correct opportunity to use our existing landing sites, our existing recovery vessels alongside our partner.
Our next question is from Will Robinson Smith from Spaceflight Now. Go ahead, your line's open.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Question to either the administrator or assistant administrator. Given that there will be a gap between when Crew-11 departs and when Crew-12 is able to get there, can you talk about weighing the risk of just having one U.S. Crew member on board station in the event of an additional, or in the event of an emergency? I realize this is not an emergent event that's causing Crew-11 to return, but were there to be an emergency on station, if there's just a Soyuz, how do you handle that? Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, having a single Soyuz on board ISS is a config we're very familiar with. As I mentioned earlier, we flew space station that way for many, many years. We always protect for, in the event of a subsequent failure on the vehicle, that we would be able to bring that crew home safely, and the vehicle is very autonomous and robust and can be configured in a way to support uncrewed operations as needed. So from that standpoint, that additional risk compared to how we've flown in the past is well understood. We generally do, and we like to have U.S. EVA capability at the ready to respond to additional failures, and in those particular cases, we would have a delayed response to one of those significant failures if we had them on board. That, of course, the vehicle is very fault tolerant, so not only we would have to have a major subsequent failure, but then a failure after that before we had a real contingency on board ISS, which is why, as we evaluated the situation, we decided it made a lot more sense to protect for a situation that we knew was something we needed to deal with, rather than something of a likelihood that we deemed lower than normal. And also the crew on board, both Russian and American, are well trained to operate in the environment that they're in and can operate the nominal systems, the nominal research per the plan until their crewmates arrive on Crew-12.
Next question is from Anthony Leon from Spectrum News. Go ahead, your line's open.
Hello, that's Leonie. Thank you so much, all three, for taking the time to speak with us today. My question is, I guess, for Mr. Isaacman. Going forward, will NASA consider having an actual medical officer, MD, on board the ISS and future space missions? And this is for Dr. Polk. How's the crew equipped to dealing with medical issues that were to come up in this situation? Can you sort of explain how they were able to help this astronaut who had this medical issue? Thank you.
So, to just address from my portion in this, all of our astronauts go through extensive medical training. There is, as I described before, a lot of capabilities on the International Space Station that our astronauts interact with routinely, whether it's part of their science research obligations or just training simulations for these type of contingencies. I don't think if one of our astronauts on board was a medical doctor, it would have changed anything as it relates to our decision process on this. I think that speaks to their level of training. Also, our teams on the ground. We have flight surgeons, and not to mention numerous other surgeons and doctors that are available to weigh in on these type of situations. So, I think simply put, if you have enough people in a challenging environment of microgravity for now approaching, or exceeding a quarter of a century, certain situations will develop that, almost regardless of the on-orbit capabilities, you're gonna take the correct action to bring them home. And I think that's worth reinforcing too, that we are exercising the capabilities that were designed into the International Space Station at will right now. So we can bring our crew home early in a safe way, not in an emergency, to its nominal landing site, because they largely completed their mission objectives. We can evaluate Crew-12, which is weeks away, potentially pull them forward, and do so and operate the station in its intended environment. We have an American astronaut on board. It's why they fly on Soyuz. It's why we fly Roscosmos astronauts on our vehicle. And as Amit pointed out before, this is also an environment that we operated the space station on for many, many years prior to our current Crew Dragon capabilities. And I don't know if you want to add anything else on that, Doctor. Okay.
And before we leap back to the phone bridge, I have a question from Laura Kolodny of CNBC, who's having a bit of trouble accessing it. She asks, ISS is operating in a roughly neutral power mode at the moment, and that upgrade was to get power positive. What will happen now with regards to the solar array?
Not sure about the neutral power mode. Space station, the intent of the EVA that was coming was to augment the 2 alpha solar array with a great new technology, the rollout solar arrays, which we added to the vehicle in order to configure the vehicle for future expansion for commercial activity. So the baseline power configuration of the station is well above the expected margins that we needed to. This EVA was not a contingency that was planned. It was a nominal augmentation of the power system, which we've done on 5 of the other arrays. And that rollout array that was going to be installed is really an amazing piece of hardware. We've used Space Station, as the administrator said, as an incredible test bed for exploration, as well as to help stimulate commercial space activity. And that array design is something we've used. Many other companies have used that exact array design. And so we're continuing the suite of the upgrades we had planned on ISS, but there's by no means urgency that the 2 alpha array has to be upgraded given the current power config of the vehicle.
And we can return back to the phone bridge now for virtual questions.
Thank you. Our next question is from Mike Wall from space.com. Go ahead, your line is open.
Thank you very much. This is probably for Dr. Polk. This is the first medical evacuation from the ISS, but are there any incidents over the 25-year history of astronauts on the station that you can kind of look to for guidance or to kind of draw up protocols?
Yeah, actually, we've had a host of different things that we have treated on orbit, and fortunately for us, we've had equipment and medications and things to be able to handle all of those, such that we were able to complete the treatment and or the diagnosis on orbit over the last 25 years. And common things occur commonly, right? Folks could have a toothache, folks could have ear pain. There are things that you see commonly on the ground as well over a 6-month period, and an urgent care can happen in space as well. But we are very good at forecasting and having the correct medical equipment and the medications to be able to handle those. And so we've had, although we've had multiple different medical things that we've worked over the last 25 years, all of those have been worked to completion on orbit and without incident.
The next question is from Marina Corin from Freelance Journalist. Go ahead, your line's open.
Hi, thank you. This question is for Dr. Polk. Could you give us a sense of what the affected crew member will experience over the next couple of days? Have they been told to stop working? How often will they be talking to medical personnel on the ground? And will any of the crew members be asked to provide them with medical support? Thank you.
I couldn't hear that either.
The question was if we are monitoring the crew member, are we restricting any of their activities, such that's all.
Yeah, I won't really go into a lot of detail on that one because I think that gives maybe too much detail to allude towards a diagnosis or skirts up close to the privacy aspects. Certainly the crew surgeons are monitoring the crew member and they will amend or alter anything that they see fit on the crew member if they need to. But the crew member, again, is absolutely stable. And so, I don't foresee massive changes to the timeline or their activities.
Next question is from Marcia Smith from SpacePolicyOnline.com. Go ahead, your line's open.
Thanks so much for taking my question. I'm guessing this is probably for Amit. I'm curious, so Chris Williams is going to be the only American up there, and he's going to have the whole U.S. segment to look after. And I'm curious, are there certain experiments or something you're going to have to set aside because he's the only one there? And have the Russians been trained at all on the American segment that they could help him out if necessary?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. There will be some. Of course, a full complement crew can do a lot more work. And so in terms of the amazing research we do on the vehicle, so we will have to adjust the timeline for that single crew operation. But Chris is trained to do every task that we would ask him to do on the vehicle. Of course, we also do a lot of the operations of the vehicle from our various control centers all over the world, including commercial control centers that operate a lot of our research payloads. So he will have thousands of people looking over his shoulder like our crews do all the time to help sure that they continue the groundbreaking science. To your question about the Russian crew members, historically we had in the past we had trained the Russian crew members to higher levels. in terms of their ability to operate uniquely on their own U.S. systems. That is, that's something we used to do in the past, and we kind of put that aside as we swelled the size of the U.S. crew complements. But the Russians that are on board with him, first of all, they've trained tightly together. They're a great team. They work really well together. But they also have qualification to operate the U.S. systems in an advisory mode or an assistant mode, and can, if needed, be called upon with the assistance of MCC Houston or MCC Moscow to assist in any operations.
Next question from Ryan Kenton from NASA Spaceflight.com. Go ahead, your line's open.
Thanks very much for doing this, Ryan Caton, NSF. For the administrator, in your opening remarks, you mentioned that you made the decision to bring the crew home early. I was just wondering if you could provide any information as to why you made that decision, of course, if you were able to, while remaining anonymous. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you ask at what point in time that decision was arrived at?
I was just wondering if you could provide any information as to why you made that decision specifically while remaining anonymous.
Generically asking whether we're straight, I think we addressed that. But.
Yeah, I'm sorry, thank you for that. I think no matter what, at any point or any phase of the expedition, had the situation presented itself, we would arrive at the exact same conclusion. I will say that it certainly made it that much easier and faster when you already have a crew that has done a fantastic job at achieving their on-orbit objectives. You have Crew 12 that's quickly approaching the launch. So I think that made it very easy from our perspective to trade the crew complement on orbit for just a matter of weeks longer versus ensuring that our crew is down here on Earth where they can get the best possible care and treatment if required.
I think we have time for just a couple more questions, so I'll turn it back over to the phone bridge.
Our next question is from Robert Perlman from Collect Space. Go ahead, your line's open.
Thank you. For the administrator and for Dr. Polk, first, because it involves crew members from other countries, was JAXA and Roscosmos, did they need to sign off on the plan to come home early, or were they consulted at all? And for Dr. Polk, you mentioned, or it's been described that the crew member was stable. Was he or she always in a stable condition, or were there any actions needed to be taken aboard the space station, if you could say, without going into detail, that arrived at them being in a stable condition?
So first, with respect to our international partners, I think JAXA held a news conference earlier today where they were able to speak about some of the information we put out. So I think that just speaks to the communication and the sharing of information that's been taking place across what is the International Space Station. So I think they've been, lockstep with us the entire journey. Will continue to be as we evaluate the exact deorbit timeline for the vehicle. And as we consider possibilities as it relates to the Crew 12 mission. And with that, Doctor.
Yeah, I think the administrator covered this earlier, but I won't go into specific details about the medical incident itself, but the crew is highly trained and they came to the aid of their colleague right away. And that's part of why we do that training, and we do it with every increment.
Next question is from Manuel Mazzanti from Exploración Espacial. Go ahead, your line's open.
Thank you so much. Manuel Mazzanti from Exploración Espacial. A question for Administrator Isaacman. I wonder if you can provide more details. If this decision was consensual with a crew member that was not feeling well, and now that the decision, that the situation is stable, I don't know if this crew member was insisting on staying. I'm feeling well, I want to stay up to the remaining of the mission, and then unilaterally NASA decided, no, is it better for all of you to come back earlier? Can you provide more details on that decision? Thank you.
So I think, as we mentioned before, obviously this this was a serious medical condition. That is why we're pursuing this path. Crew member is stable, as we mentioned. We're not electing an emergency deorbit, but obviously, as we've already communicated, the capability to diagnose and treat this properly does not live on the International Space Station. And I think there's pretty broad agreement across our experts here on the ground, as well as the crew members in space. So I think there's complete alignment around that point.
And we have time for just one more question, so we will toss it to the phone bridge for David's question.
Our last question is from David Curley from Full Throttle. Go ahead, your line's open.
Dr. Polk, I know you're in the middle of an incident. A little early to talk about lessons learned, but we've talked about diagnostics. Have you decided, are there diagnostic tools? Is there something that's coming with AI that might help with this kind of situation in the future? What are you thinking about beyond this incident?
Yeah, that's a great question. As the administrator mentioned before, we're always learning new things with each increment, and that's the value of the International Space Station. And we are looking at AI, we are looking at all tools, and of course, medical hardware, medical technology evolves over the years very rapidly, and of course with AI even more so over the last several years. And so we're looking at all potential technologies, including AI, to augment the crew's health and safety, especially as we get to Moon and Mars. And that'll be the advantage to the Moon as well, is to use it as a test bed for many of these technologies on our way to Mars.
And with that last question, I will turn the floor over to Administrator Isaacman for any closing remarks.
I appreciate everybody responding and being on site and with good questions right now. As I mentioned before, we are exercising the capabilities that we have pioneered over the life of the International Space Station. We have the ability to bring our crew member home under these circumstances in a very planned and controlled way. We have the ability to evaluate Crew-12 and their timeline and look for opportunities to potentially pull that forward if required. The International Space Station and the way we design our crew complements between the vehicles is meant for this type of circumstance. That's why we will retain an American crew member to interact with the American segments, and that's also why we fly Russian and international crew members on our vehicles. So this is proceeding exactly as designed. This is how we train for these type of situations routinely. And what you're seeing right now is NASA communicating and being as transparent as we possibly can. And as soon as we have updates as to I think the next big milestones are going to be determining our reentry timeline, we will be the first to share it with you, and we will do the same with respect to our Crew-12 timeline. And thank you.
And that concludes today's briefing. Thank you.
And we're going to go ahead and just recap what we heard. There was a lot of information that came out over the last roughly 3/4 of an hour. The top headline, though, is Crew-11 is confirmed that they are coming home early. Administrator Jared Isaacman said that they're going to be making that assessment over the next few days and firm up the timeline, so could be expecting that potentially as soon as the start of next week, perhaps sooner. We'll have to wait and see when the timing is firmed up, but the administrator said, with the exception of shortening the timeline to when the crew would undock, as far as the process of returning them back to Earth, that is not an emergency return to Earth. It's not an emergent deorbit, but rather this is a response to a medical issue, and they could control the timeline with a little bit more relaxation. But the reason that they're bringing them back early is because of both the nature of whatever the medical issue was, which the administrator described as, quote, a serious medical condition, adding that there was not the ability to properly diagnose and properly treat on the International Space Station, which is why for the first time in 25 years of continuous human presence, they are bringing back a crew early to further assess. And to further assess what we just heard, want to bring in Gina Sunseri, Houston-based space reporter for CBS News. Gina, we got a lot of information to us, both from the administrator, the assistant administrator, as well as the chief medical officer. Besides the date moving, or if that was your top takeaway, I just want to get your immediate reaction to what we just heard for the better part of an hour.
Well, the administrator was very firm on saying this is not an emergency return. that it's an opportunity to return the crew early to address this medical issue. But he was, don't you think, very clear in saying this is not an emergency return. And it was interesting to me. They ruled out that it was not related to the spacewalk preps. So they ruled out a lot of things that we were curious about. He actually gave me information I didn't know. I didn't realize JAXA had done something earlier today, so I'm going to have to go look at that and research that. But again, we know that SpaceX has equipment on both coasts, so they can look for an opportune landing position and get equipment into place for that. And it's going to be good to see just how fast, what kind of return they do. What do you think? What are your guesses on, will they do how, it won't be a 2-day return. What do you think it will be, Will?
As far as timeline from when they undock to when they splash
Undocking
down?
to splash down, yeah. That's going to be really
Yeah,
curious to see how they execute that. And then how much video will they give us? We're used to seeing a lot of video. I mean, remember all the dolphins when Butch and Sunny came home, right? And what was interesting is going to see, as they get off of the capsule, will we be able to tell? Because again, we don't know which astronaut was sick. And it's HIPAA. It's a violation of their privacy. We will not find out unless they choose to come public for some reason. But so we're still reading a lot of tea leaves on this.
Yeah, and as far as the return location, you mentioned the return of Crew 9, which was off the coast of Florida, as it so happened. But that was actually the last time, at least as far as SpaceX has announced, that they would be doing an East Coast splashdown, and subsequently retired the East Coast Dragon recovery vessel, which I believe is named Megan after NASA astronaut Megan MacArthur. So they still have Shannon, which is now out west, that has received a couple of Dragon capsules so far. So likely we'll see it somewhere in the normal nexus of where we're now used to seeing Dragon splash down off the coast of California, and they'll, over the next, I imagine 24 hours, maybe a little bit longer, shore up based off of coordinating with the FAA as well as weather officers, what the conditions are going to be like at all of their opportunities for splashdown zones, and then hone in on what the final one will be. But worth noting that the administrator said, except for the timing, this will look a lot like a regular return. So Gina, to your point about the visuals, I'm hoping that we'll get the usual cameras on station within the Dragon. They'll probably have cameras on board the recovery vessels. So hoping this will be, a fairly typical return in that regard, and that there will be a pre-splashdown briefing. Hopefully this wasn't our only chance to get more information about what the timing of everything is. But I imagine once they shored up, the administrator made a point of being transparent about how all this process is going to the extent that they can. Obviously, they're not going to go into super fine medical details, but as far as the operations on station, as well as operations back on the ground, hopefully this won't look too dissimilar from other Dragon returns.
And then I think also the administrator made it a point to answer a couple of questions. What's going to take priority, Artemis 2 or Crew 12? Because as we know, they're awfully close together. So will they move the Crew 12 launch up? I mean, I know you cover all of the Starlink launches, and so we'll just have to see what the range looks like in early February for 2 very important missions coming up.
Yeah, the range is going to be quite busy over here on the East Coast. I mean, we've got a Starlink mission that was supposed to happen today. That punted to now tomorrow. There's a couple of SpaceX Falcon 9 launches from both coasts on Sunday, and then another Starlink coming up next week, another one pretty close to after that. So the flow from SpaceX is likely going to continue on, but we'll see how that may shift now, if it does shift towards the end of January for the Falcon 9 side, since SpaceX Vice President of Flight, Kiko Donchev, or Vice President of Launch, I should say, did make a point to post on X that Launch Complex 39A is going to be down for a while as they continue to put their heads down and really work a lot on the Starship Tower there. So the vast majority of launch operations are going to be happening at Space Launch Complex 40 at the Cape. So does that mean SpaceX needs to pause some of the launches that they had planned so that they can start earlier preparations for Crew 12? That's a question that didn't get really drilled into. It seemed like, Administrator Isaacman wanted to focus mostly on, the news at hand, what's happening with Crew-11 and the timeline there. So we should hopefully get more detail on all of that in the coming days and weeks.
And then you and I will get an opportunity to sit down and talk to the Crew-12 astronauts coming up here in the next couple of weeks before they go into quarantine before their launch.
Yeah, those are going to be some interesting conversations. I mean, you've talked to many more astronauts than I've had the pleasure to, but the fact that they have now this place in history where, for the first time in the commercial crew era, you've got this very sizable gap between when one crew departs and one crew arrives. I mean, we talked a little bit about the gap between crews 2 leaving and crew 3 arriving. That was just a couple of days. This is a much longer opportunity for, NASA and the international partners to, work with Chris Williams, the now we know going to be the remaining U.S. astronaut on station, to prioritize, all right, what science needs to get taken care of, what repair work is, now at the top of his list. He's going to be a very busy bee. And, I'm curious to hear what the Crew-12 astronauts are thinking about that. Maybe they'll bring up some extra goodies for him to, as a welcome gift and a departing gift for him, just to say, thanks for, carrying the load a little bit extra for us before he got here.
Yeah, he launched on Thanksgiving, spent Christmas, spent New Year's up there on the space station. I hope they're packing some goodies for him.
Certainly hope so. One other thing I wanted to make note of or highlight that Dr. Polk mentioned, obviously a lot of questions came his way trying to get as much context and detail about what happened with this crew member, the timing, was it related to the spacewalk activities? Like you mentioned, Gina, you did mention explicitly that this was not related to an operational happenstance, in connection to the spacewalk or other nominal ISS operations. So it does invite some questions about, what exactly is the nature of this diagnosis that's serious enough that it's calling for an early return, but not so serious that it's in emergent return, as Administrator Isaacman mentioned. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to get those answers, but we did get some things ruled out, mostly in my mind that it wasn't, something that it sounded like injured the astronaut, which is certainly good in that respect.
Right. Yeah. And I really enjoyed doing this, Will, because I see I need to make some contributions to your collection back there. I'll bring some goodies with me for Artemis 2 launch to add to your collection.
I appreciate that. And for folks that may have joined the broadcast late, Gina is based in Houston. She's actually standing outside one of the main astronaut training buildings at the Johnson Space Center and has, leading up to this briefing, been working her sources, learning about, what we're going to learn here in this briefing. And so it's been a real treat, Gina, to have you with us to break it all down on the other side.
Always a pleasure. I love your Starship launch coverage. Thank you, Will. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Gina. And thank you to all of you out there who've been watching along with us. Of course, we'll have much more coverage on this in the hours and days to come as we track now the early return of Crew-11 from the International Space Station. What will happen in the gap between? Will this impact Artemis or not? Administrator Isaacman says that they're able to keep those on 2 distinct flows. So look for more coverage on the Artemis 2 mission in the very near future, and as well as a whole bevy of Falcon 9 launches coming your way, as well as a Vulcan launch from over at Space Launch Complex 41 that's popped up in the queue for the start of February. So lots of things to cover. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and stick with us here at Spaceflight Now for all of that coverage coming your way. Want to thank our editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of this broadcast, this impromptu broadcast today. Another thank you to Gina for joining us, to our mods who've been diligently watching the chat, and to member Cumulus Granados for helping to answer folks' questions as a lot of information was coming through the administrator's updates. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson-Smith. Of course, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. Until then, be good. Bye-bye.